Greetings and welcome to True Health Live. We are back. We took a little bit of a summer break, but we're back for this August, and we're glad that you could join us. So I'm back, and so Deidre Sully is with you. And I just wanted to also introduce that myself as Yafe, which is my new designation given to me by my community with Anu Life Global Ministries. So from here on out, I'll be referred to as Yafe. So you'll see that. So you'll see that, and it's awesome. It's a beautiful name, and I'm so happy to be called as such. So I'm joined by my beautiful co-hosts, two of them, Alia.
Hi. It's been a while.
Yes, it's been a while, but it's like no time has passed. It's okay.
No,
It's okay.
exactly.
It's okay. It's okay. And Precious, my name is Precious. Not
Yes.
no more.
And you know what? Right. So while I didn't capture it here, here if you're watching this, but while I didn't capture it, in the name description below my image on the video, my name was also changed, which was a fantastic experience to Yakira Eden, though it isn't captured below. And so, yeah, that has been a real transformational experience just to receive a new attribute and to begin to live up to that. So you'll see this name, Precious Stepney, as well as Yakira Eden on different platforms as we reacclimate, right? So, yeah.
Yes, yes. It's growth, and that's a part of health too, right? We're growing and we're changing and we're evolving, and that is healthy. We can't stay stagnant, as we learned recently. Even though stagnant, there it has its purpose too, and there's some things that we can glean, but growth is always important.
Yeah.
So, that being said, today's show is going to be about reproductive health. Now, we've talked about reproductive health in previous episodes in the last season, but it's always going to be something on the forefront, especially when we see like what's been happening in the US, like in these last couple of days. Reproductive health rights, as some will say, like are under attack. A lot of states are banning abortion, what were, on their own. And then we also had like the recent Supreme Court decision. Interestingly enough, I have my own ideas on that. I do. It's like, I think people should have the choice, for what they want to do with their bodies. At the same time, I understand that there's like, some subliminal like things happening. What we don't really look at is like the birth rates. Birth rates are really
Mhm.
low. And I wondered if this was a means to increase birth rates. Well, if we can stop people from, um, getting certain procedures, maybe we can increase birth rates, right? But that's just my own. That could be like a conspiracy or whatever, but that's kind of what I'm sitting with. So, and maybe we'll get into that later because I know it's a hot topic, a hot button issue. But what I really wanted to speak to today was about like rights. But before that, like I see like the head nods. Like, did either of you have anything to say about like what's happening now with like reproductive health rights?
So from my perspective, I've just been watching this as a bystander because I'm pretty still I consider myself an outsider almost. I still
Mm-hmm.
haven't kind of assimilated within to kind of US culture and society entirely. So it's interesting because I actually found myself a little bit ignorant of certain issues that after, reading about, what's currently happening regarding reproductive rights, I was actually surprised to see that, the US might be, going, this is just being broadcast, worldwide, and we're seeing
Yeah.
this, and it's a, US focus almost, but other countries as well. And their kind of policies that I started researching and looking into that, and I was like, really? I didn't even know that. And a lot can be said for like Europe, parts of Europe, and other countries in terms of their policies and how restrictive they are, and how, in terms of women having control over their body and having the choice to do, the choice to make in terms of managing, their bodies.
Yeah.
I think it's really in many places it's very restrictive, and not just the US.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I think that there is so much to be said about women's health and reproductive rights. But it seems that those saying it and setting the standard are never actually the women,
Yeah.
or the individual holders of said womb space or reproductive
Mm-hmm.
organs. And so I think that while there has been and will continue to be lots of discussion, until we understand how our bodies work and function and revel in that and all that it does, it's kind of like a moot point, even like rallying one way or another. I think what's most important is that there is self-awareness. And I know that's what we touch on in, on these podcasts, is how valuable it is to be able to advocate for yourself.
Mhm.
And you can only
Mm-hmm.
do that when armed with knowledge. So
Right.
I look forward to, just digging
Yes.
in.
Yeah. And that being said, with the self awareness, there's this pervasive movement of women of color
Mhm.
being subjected to invasive surgery more often than their white counterparts, and especially like Black women of compared to other races. So when it comes to procedures like cesareans and hysterectomies, um, women of color get them more. And this came about because I was having a conversation with a sister, and she was saying, she was relaying to me, which we'll get into because this we're going to share her story on the womb room, and we'll talk about the womb room later. She was sharing how she didn't really get all of the information. So it's kind of like that idea of patient advocacy. Not even idea, it's an issue of patient advocacy.
Mhm.
When you're sitting in the doctor's office, actually comprehending and understanding what's being said to you and why, and then being equipped to be able to ask the appropriate and pertinent questions to see if there are alternative measures that can be taken. And so she was telling me how she was sitting in the office, and I don't want to give too much away because I want everybody to tune in. She didn't really understand. They just said, well, because you're having this issue, we should do a hysterectomy. But it was like, okay, but what's the issue? Like, what was the actual diagnosis that requires this procedure that you're going to take? And I think it was a partial, that you're going to take part of my womb out of my body. And we see like this movement nowadays toward like preserving fertility, and she's already had children. And I'm not, I would imagine, and I have not had children, but I would imagine that anyone, regardless if you had children or not, removing that piece of you, especially for a woman, can be quite traumatic. There's plenty of stories and things online where people are sharing about their experience and the emotional ups and downs that go along
Of
with the
course.
removal.
Of
Mhm.
course. There is so much, right? I, I will share that I come from many generations of women who have had a hysterectomy. And I would say actually by the time they were 40.
Mm,
Granted, most of them, women on both sides, my paternal
mm-hmm.
and maternal,
Right.
the grandmothers, all of my aunts, just about my mother. And they did have children in their teens and 20s. And so it to them, I think that it was of little consequence. And at that time, because we have had discussions about this, i- in my adulthood, just exploring, like, did you not think that you wanted to try to preserve your womb or keep it? And it was just
Right.
a different era. It was a different time. It was
Mm-hmm.
like, fine, well, I have children already, and I just want this pain or this discomfort or this, heavy cycle to end.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But as I think about that, and I think about, myself and us, this generation of women, it is so much more about education and advocacy and looking at, I mean, granted, we have access to much more information, right? Readily, right?
Mm-hmm.
Readily, easy access. Um, but we get to dig deeper and to be informed consumers. And I think the biggest distinction is that, yes, your physician may call you a patient, but you are a customer. You are a paying customer. And just because you
Right.
pass them an insurance card and maybe just a nominal $20, $50 deductible,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't take away the relationship, right? And the dynamic. It's a service dynamic. So I think many of us, we don't walk into our healthcare practitioner's office with that mindset that you're here to provide me a service,
Mm,
not me just take whatever you tell me as the ultimate authority and do with
right.
my body as you say. So, and as a mother of two, I will say that keeping every part of all of what I was born with is vital. Like it doesn't matter, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, like I remember thinking like, well, this happens when, usually after, and this is when I
Yeah.
was younger before I knew anything. It was like this usually happens like after a woman's probably had childbirth, and
Mhm.
maybe there's like a medical condition that happened or something that really warrants a hysterectomy. And to be clear, hysterectomy is actually like the most frequent surgical after second most after C-section performed on women in the U.S. It is the surgical removal of the uterus. And yeah, like I used to think that it was something that happened, afterwards. We're seeing women in their 20s and
Oh yeah.
30s now, like
Mhm.
younger and younger, and a lot of it due to fibroids. Not even, and many of them have
Yeah.
not had children, and that's a whole other issue. The fibroids and how that could be connected to health and the food. And to your point, Precious, it's like the idea of service, like and being a customer, there's that whole other dark side to the medical, I guess I'll say medical industry, where it's like it's more beneficial if I just treat your symptoms and keep you sick, because then I can get you to take these drugs, and everything is like feeding something else. There's never any, and we talk about this all the time with the food. There's never any like, okay, maybe change your diet. Like they'll do say change your diet, but never like a real, honest look at like, okay, they'll say lean meats, maybe cut out meat altogether, And I know a lot of people don't want to hear that because it's like, where are we gonna get protein? There's protein in a lot of things, and you can't just ingest proteins. It's actually adjusting things with like the amino acids of things so that it can convert to protein. So there's clearly like there's that knowledge, there's an education that people need about how food works, like how we feed our bodies and how it actually turns into fuel and what we need, and how the things that we eat fuel other diseases and create things in our bodies. And so that's what we get to like issues like fibroids and how pervasive it is, especially in women of color. And then they find themselves, oh, you need a hysterectomy, not well, let's see how we can address this. Or it'll be myomectomy, is that what they call it?
Yes.
Correct.
Myomectomy,
Removal of the fibroids. Yeah.
right, and a lot of the times then there's that other piece of the mistrust of the medical system with and which is warranted, especially when it comes to people of color. There's a mistrust, so they're not necessarily going to the doctor to find out. It's like the last resort. But
Exactly.
then by the time they get there, they're kind of beyond like multiple options of treatment, and so then we have surgery. So yeah.
Just going off on what you were saying, Yafe, also, yeah, I was about to mention the uterine fibroid issue, and that a lot of younger women usually have those fibroids, don't know that they have those fibroids, are not
Yeah.
even told about them or educated about them. The
Mm-hmm.
way they find out, I mean, I personally can speak from experience. I only found out, later on, and I was like, oh, I didn't know. I didn't have any
Mm-hmm.
symptoms. You don't necessarily have symptoms, but a lot of women do, and the
Yeah.
only way they find out about them is via friends, talking with friends. They don't necessarily find that out from their practitioner, or doctor. And then, like you say, that is one way in which could, if the fibroids are really bad and, haven't been monitored, that could end up, leading to hysterectomy at a young
Yeah.
age. And then you also have that, that fear of also the removal of the fibroid procedure. They may go for the most invasive option when there are other options that could be considered, but because women are
Mm-hmm.
not educated about this, they think, oh, this
Mm-hmm.
is the only option that I have available to me, and that option actually could be very dangerous in the sense that you
Right.
could end up in a hysterectomy while trying to remove the fibroid.
Right.
So I think that that feeds into the fear and the mistrust as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it comes to preserving fertility, like for example, cancer patients as well, the insurance options that are available to say patients that need to have that option whereby they can have options for maintaining fertility, preserving it, are not available. So that leaves them in a pretty much a very kind of restricted place where they don't really have that much choice, or they're not really educated about the options. And like you say, they go into see their doctor, they're 100% trusting this person to make the most I don't know what the word would be, but the most beneficial option for them, or provide them with options, a variety of options, when in actual fact they just go for the most invasive option, and they think that's all that there is available to them. So it's about giving people agency, educating them so that they know what the questions they should be asking, and the options that may be available to them should they not be offered those options.
Yeah.
So
And the education piece could and should begin at home. And I guess, like, as I shared, a piece of my experience and my family's experience, um, I realized in sharing it that, their their knowledge or their decisions helped informed my decision now. Um, because I watched them be thrust into menopause at much earlier ages than they should have, and how that created its own sense of challenges and discomfort for them, as well as just, I think, maybe it was behind the scenes where we were talking about the connection between our physical and the spiritual, but there's also something to be said, and you know what, and there is science that speaks to this, right? When someone loses a limb, there is that phantom sensation. There is.
Phantom pain.
So let's imagine when you experience a partial hysterectomy or a full hysterectomy. It doesn't mean that discomfort, those challenges, or whatever fed those fibroid, and we're speaking about uterine fibroids, but there's also endometriosis, there's also PCOS. There are many
different
womb-related conditions, or reproductive challenges that present themselves, and many of them are based on hormonal imbalance. And when we think about hormonal imbalance, we may consider the food that we eat, but we don't consider stressors and environmental toxins, and how much of that actually sets the tone for your womb being attacked. We also don't even get into, motility or elimination, and the colon, and how that's all connected, because we never really want to, right? Just the word alone is like,
no,
we're going to talk about it.
I was going to say, check out the podcast on colonoscopy.
Yes, exactly.
But going off of what you're saying, Precious, as well, and the hormonal aspect, I don't think a lot of people actually realize that after a hysterectomy, you're on hormone replacement therapy, essentially. And I've had family members that in itself is, it can lead to a number of emotional imbalances, hormonal imbalances, issues that they have to contend with. And I think, in fact, I'd have to double check on this, but it actually has a link to kind of certain cancers, I think, as well. So there's a whole host of other problems that you kind of introduce, by going down that route. And of course, in some cases, that's the only route available, given the circumstances. But I think, patients definitely, goes back to, again, education, like you say, should come from the home. We should be talking about this openly. We should be, researching and reading about it, and taking back our agency, essentially. So we know our bodies, and we know, what's right for us, essentially.
Yeah, I like that, taking back our agencies, because how many of us don't know? Like, Precious, you said something really key, like learning about it at home. And there was an extent to what I learned. It's like, you're going to bleed. And that didn't even come until after it started. There was not like, a sit down, like, this is what happens. Da, 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 da. It was whatever I had to glean from health class and like learning about my body. And then it's like, okay, when it happens, I'll know exactly what it is. But there wasn't like this happened. Sometimes it was like, okay, well, let's, go to the doctor. And it's really key to have that knowledge first from home before you get anything from the
Mhm.
outside, because it's received differently, and it comes with a different spirit. And then early on, and then you have something to pass on, to your children, your daughter, after a while. And so yeah, I think that is really, really, really key. There was something else that you brought up that I wanted to speak to, like, yeah, it's not just fibroids. It's a few different things. Like, just like when I was talking with the sister, like, I was like, "Are you sure there was no diagnosis?" She was like, "I don't know." And here's the thing: they could have said something, but the mere fact of getting like really devastating news and not even being like attuned to how the patient is receiving it, and you really going over, this is what needs to happen and this is why, that is key. And then that also goes to show us, like, sometimes we got to have someone there with us. We got to have someone there with us to hear what we don't hear, because I've been in that situation before with something with womb health, and it was just a simple scan. She's like, all right, well, we're going to get you a scan. I literally blacked out. It was
Yes.
like, wah, 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 wah. I don't know what she was saying. The tears were welling up because all I heard was scan. And I was like, scan means there's something there. And that's not necessarily what it means. But, as a person who's never been hospitalized, like, I'm like, what is this? And it's just like, I don't know what she said. So I showed up to the scan unprepared. I didn't fast. There's a whole procedure that's supposed to happen. You're supposed to drink contrast, da 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 da. And I did none of that because I wasn't listening. But had I had someone there, or even like had a recorder on, because some of us may not have someone to like come with us. People work, let's be honest. And because we also know a lot of people who suffer from like these invasive procedures are women who are poorer, and and studies have shown like it happens a lot more like in the South, in the places that are more poverty stricken. In the South in this country has more poverty stricken areas. And had I had a recorder, most of us all have smart cell phones. Put that recorder on and let the doctor talk so that you can review it when you go back. So that's even advocating for yourself, or even bringing someone to advocate for you, so you can ask the question. So even if you didn't have somebody, you can go home, listen to the recording, then you can go back and ask your questions. So that to reduce and minimize those times that we're in that position.
Yeah. I think as I'm thinking, or as I'm listening to you all, and when we talk about reproductive health, we're talking about woman issues, right? And it wasn't so long ago when PMS was considered a mental illness, and it was linked to hysteria,
That's
and
why they
you were
call it a hysterectomy.
hospitalized. So
Mm-hmm.
as the mental health, as the practitioner here, as the healthcare leader here that has, a long history working with that population, I'm like, well, wait, it wasn't that long ago that, if we even said we felt discomfort in our wombs, or, I feel a mental fog after, on these segments, we've discussed not just postpartum depression,
Yeah.
but baby blues and all of the different shifts and challenges that you may experience that are, for the most part, just a part of the hormones reacclimating and rebalancing. But there was a time where that would have resulted in you being hospitalized.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we consider this is the same healthcare system that we're now relying upon to um, produce equitable, informed options, no, it is not. And so it's just really, really important that we continue to have these conversations, and share information, because without it, we'll be lost. Like, I mean, I think the biggest example of that is the idea of even a myomectomy, which is a very invasive. I mean, it's a C-section minus removal of a baby. Like, that's
Oh,
actually
okay.
what it is.
Wow.
You're cut the same way, but instead of removing a fetus, because you're not pregnant when you have a myomectomy, they're removing fibroid tumors.
Okay.
Um,
They actually can do so. They can do this without actually having to do that in certain cases where they fire
There
a
is
laser and it's
Yes.
well,
not
that is
so invasive.
The
yes.
Yeah,
So
embolization.
there's also embolization, but then there's also laparoscopic myomectomy
exactly.
as well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
which is relatively new. Ask me how I know all of these things.
I
I
was thinking that they did
research.
do lapar. I'm like, at this point, shouldn't they have a way to do
They
lapar without
have
cutting you all the way open?
I would say recently, as in like the last 10, 12, maybe 15 years. I lose track of time, maybe 15, because my daughter's already like 12. But I want to give context to those who don't even understand what a
Yeah.
myomectomy is when they hear it.
Right.
Your physician will tell you if you're a viable candidate for a laparoscopic myomectomy, and then you'll know, oh, it's not a big cut; it's a series of smaller incisions, and then they go in through these tubes and lasers. But I don't think that's what's going to be offered to the population that we're acknowledging and advocating for right now. They will more than likely be pushed, if not a full or partial hysterectomy, be pushed towards a myomectomy. So I wanted to give that visual of it's a cut right at the pubic bone as a hysterectomy or even a C-section is done. And with that, know your options. So we just rattled through a few, but there are
Yeah.
so many, including it's always getting back to the diet and the stress manage.
Yeah. Yeah. The stress is a big thing, like, because if you're always in these stressful environments and your cortisol levels are up, your body actually goes into this fight or flight, and it will continue pushing cortisol, and you continue to stay in that stressful state. And if you continue to stay there, it actually can have detrimental impact and effect on things like, brain function, respiratory. It can actually, cause like a domino effect negatively. I mean, because we all like to see dominoes fall, but this is not a good thing. You don't want to see like this, chain reaction is probably the best way to, of different systems having trouble and failing because you have increased and continued elevated cortisol levels from stress. And so it's like really important to have those pieces where health is not just thinking about the physical, but also the mental and the spiritual. It's really, really key. I remember what I was gonna say, and it was about the hormones. Like Alia, you talked about like the hormone replacement therapy, and also Precious, you mentioned like kind of coming in, which came in with, and I was thinking like we come in with our parts the way they're supposed to be. Everything is regulated. They move, and it makes me think we have this discussion on cooperative, right, and being cooperating, and it's like they all move and coordinate and cooperate with one another. Even the way your hormones, the hormones that are produced by the ovaries, they come to the thyroid, to the brain, everything. And so when the uterus is removed and you no longer have that organ that's supposed to produce a specific hormones, what do you think happens when there's nothing feeding? There's signals, so it's like a telephone. One end of the line is dead. So then now you have to figure out something to replace what was there, and you're not ever really the same,
Right.
you know?
And I think so much has to do with empowerment. Um, the story of even knowing about our menstrual cycle. If I'm sure we could do a series of volumes of books on what wasn't said, or how we found out, or the embarrassing trauma, invoking experiences we had. Just having that rites of passage, which is what it is. But when you think about the beginnings, if there's no ownership, if there's no celebration, if there's no movement or even cooperation around this is what's coming and it's beautiful and it means you're entering into womanhood and this is what it means to be a woman, to do what women do, then there's confusion. And where there's confusion, there'll be shame. And where there's shame, there'll be hiding.
Yeah.
So we hide until we're told we have an issue. And then it's like, well, take it away, take it away, take it away. So I know like we're talking about advocacy and ownership, But as we're talking, I'm thinking, well, you know what? But what's the thought? What's the mind of what was my mind? Um, my mind was fight, quite honestly. But I think it was because all my aunts and my mother, like they were open about it in a different sort of way. Like, yeah, we had to do this, and this is what we did. And but because they were open about it, I think I was 22 when my cigarette smoking, 6'5" Eastern European physician walks in. He's salt and pepper hair, this big burly. I don't know how I wound up with him. I do recall one of my colleagues, an older woman. She actually said he was really amazing with reproductive issues, and she actually had children very late in life, and so that's how I wound up with him. But he let me know that I had fibroids in a very gruff way. And then I will never forget because I was just finishing up grad school. He said, well, you better poop or get off the pot. And he didn't use the word poop. And he's like, because you don't have very long to have children. I was like, I'm only 21. I don't want to have children now. Granted, I would say that is the best time to have children. That is when your body is most ready. And so I have a very different understanding and a different mind towards how a woman should prepare for life. But that said, at that time, I was thinking about career and finances and acquiring property, and having children wasn't on my mind. But when he told me a hysterectomy was imminent, I thought, there's no way. There's no way. But there's so many that are shrouded in the shame of it that they don't think about how to fight. It's almost like, what's the option? Fine, I'll take it. Right. Not even realizing there are so many other options. And I have a few, but I want to I'll pause because I know I can go on.
No, it's and that's like it's a good segue into we'll be having some of these conversations on another platform with Honor Life Global Ministries, and we're calling it the Womb Room, and we're going to talk about reproductive health and the womb in all its facets, both the physical and the spiritual piece of it. Starting with like some interviews on women who have had experiences, like the sister that I was mentioning before about her hysterectomy. It's open for people. If you want to share your story, definitely get in touch with us. You can, put in a message. You can even put a message here, and I can work with you to get you over to the Womb Room space. And we'll be on different platforms like Facebook and Clubhouse and YouTube, having these very open and public conversations about womb health and what it means to be, when you have your period and being set apart spiritually. Like, we're going to cover a lot. So, we definitely encourage people to come, because that's going to be the space to talk about a lot of womb things. Like, because, we're all women sitting here. We're all wombs sitting here in this space, and, why not create the more spaces where we talk about what it means to, have a womb and move in that space, the better. Just really quick, I remembered another thing. You talked about mental health, and I wanted to go back, because we'll recap like what some of these procedures are. Hysterectomy and the idea that we're, it's from hysteria, because when, back in, I don't remember the time period, but back in the day, when it was considered like PMS and things that happened with women were considered mental illnesses, it was like, well, it's coming from the uterus. It's because they have a womb. And so when they would remove the womb, that's where you get the name hysterectomy, because the suffix in medical term, in medical land, ectomy means to remove. It means to excise, to come out. So hysterectomy was like, we're going to remove the uterus. And thinking of, talking about systems change and how things need to change, and we have to have equitable. And I was always like, well, why haven't they changed the name to uterectomy? Or, something that makes more sense with the organ that's actually being removed, because this is not called a hysteria. It's called a uterus. It's called a womb, or womb, even wombectomy, so it's very clear what's happening, but I thought that was really interesting that the name sticks, it stuck, and it never changed. So it's kind of got that that historical connotation of it being a mental illness and a problem, that still kind of sits with what's happening with the womb. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting. So unless anybody has any other, we talked about a lot. Like, unless anybody else has something else they want to share, I think it's important, like we go over. So, hysterectomy, it is the removal of the uterus. Myomectomy is the actual removal of fibroid tumors. As Precious said, there's the full myomectomy where they cut you in the same way that they would with a hysterectomy or a cesarean. But there's also options like a laparoscopic myomectomy where they have smaller incisions and they use scopes and tubes to address. And there's also embolism. We didn't really talk about that, but the embolism is where they use lasers, which is heat, and it cuts off the blood supply, because that's how fibroids actually survive. They're like literally like sucking the life out of you, because blood is life, and they cut off the blood supply, and that allows the fibroids to shrink and willfully die.
Mm-hmm. And that last one, it's a uterine embolization. And yeah, they can either use like cauterize with heat, or sometimes they use bands to cut off the flow, the blood flow that feeds the fibroids. And what's important to recognize, even with if you're a candidate for uterine embolization, is that it can be, oh, and sometimes they even like shoot pellets. There's another way that I just remembered. And those pellets actually just pretty much they all do the same thing, stop the flow of blood. That, if you think about it, because the pellets always make me think of pain. If you think about it, they are all very, have the potential to be very, very painful. And while the uterine embolization is something that is done on an outpatient basis, like it's, you're in and you're out that same day, there is a lot of, I know several women who have had that procedure. There's a lot of discomfort as those,
really?
well, yeah, because you're cutting off, depending on the size of the fibroid, you're severing. It's kind of like just put a string on your finger for a little while. And you probably take it off when it starts getting numb, right? But imagine if that's happening on the inside, because it's something that is being fed and it's a substantial size. So there is a lot of discomfort with that. And I'm sharing all of this because, yes, those are options, and those are definitely options that are, more advantageous than going in for a traditional myomectomy, which in all of those types of procedures, of course, when you're signing consents, and a part of the informed consent process, your practitioner will tell you that if anything goes wrong, they have the right to proceed with a more invasive surgery right then and there. And so unless you say firmly and concretely, absolutely not, stitch me back up, they will. Either not go forward at all, or you'll wind up just conceding and signing. But what we don't know, or what we often don't realize, is that when you have health insurance, there are some alternative therapies that are actually covered. And I know we've touched on this before. I'm sure I touched on it with the lactation help when we spoke about that, because that was a new discovery for me when I was lactating and had challenges. I was like, oh, insurance can pay for this? Well, and my personal own lactation specialist and like medical grade, hospital grade pumping and pumps at home. Yes, they can and they do. So know that and explore that. But also, as it pertains to acupuncture and lots of alternative therapies, they too can be covered. And acupuncture is phenomenal for stress management. And there are many like licensed and certified acupuncture therapists who focus on reproductive health specifically. So research and, really, really dig deep to find out what the what your options are and what your rights are, because we don't take advantage of a lot of what our health insurance actually covers for.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and even pain management, that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So
I would
I,
I would
Yeah.
say I would say if you don't you don't ask, you don't know, essentially, right?
Right.
And then going back to just to kind of just conclude in essence, um, having a myectomy doesn't mean that's going to be the solution long term. It doesn't mean
That's
that
true.
fibroids are not going to they're not going to be new growths.
Right.
So,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of patients would probably go in thinking that, okay, if I have this procedure done, that will be the
We'll be
end of it and
done.
I don't have to deal with it
Mm-hmm.
again. But so that's
Mm-hmm.
where I guess diet comes into the
Yeah.
discussion, a
Mm-hmm.
more long-term preventative measure.
Yeah.
Again, so yeah, it's something to think about
Yeah,
for
you
sure.
can't just like, oh, hit it and quit it. Like, oh,
Yeah,
one and
yeah,
done. And
yeah.
I'm gonna go back to doing exactly what I was doing before. It means there's
right.
has to be a whole lifestyle change, as with any, significant diagnosis or
And that
disease
goes
in
for
the body.
endometriosis as well, and like you said, the other
Hmm.
kind of conditions that um,
Yes,
yeah,
yes. There's
women can
definitely,
experience. Yeah,
absolutely, there's definitely regiment changes
yeah.
that need to have. Like for PCOS, like we know, like part of that is like not feeding what's creating the cysts. So there definitely has to be a pullback in stress. Is a main one for PCOS. So you definitely have to acknowledge where those stressors are, and also like pull back. There's weight, right? And we know weight can be directly related to what we're eating. So there has to be like a conscious move toward healthier foods, not just less of it, but actual healthier foods that feed the body in a proper way, so that you can lose weight and also manage that stress. Because sometimes there could be stress because we're stressing about our weight, right? So like all of that feeds one another, so that so we kind of go back to, like, as always, like lifestyle.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Lifestyle and diet.
Because it is that
So,
balance.
hmm
And Alia, thank you so much for reminding, the audience that it doesn't mean that it won't come
Yeah.
back, because
right.
many do have several myomectomies. And it's also important to note that when you go in for a myomectomy, if you have very small beginner, I'm going to call them beginner tumors, they likely will not be acknowledged or removed.
Right. They'll say,
So
let's
as they'll
wait. Let's
focus
see.
on, if they tell you, if they
Hmm
focus on the larger, more substantial, the ones that they will tell you attribute to your, whatever ailments are, whatever your associated ailments are, they'll only remove those. And so if your lifestyle doesn't change,
Hmm.
you'll continue to feed the ones that were left behind. And discover that they were there before. That's the small little polyps here on your scans. So be informed. And I'll just share that, while we are excited, right? Anu Life Global Ministry has the womb room coming, as Sister Yafe touched on. Um, I also have, it's going to be so much fun. It's already actually fun. Alpha Woman Now. And Alpha Woman Now is really taking a holistic approach to exploring who the alpha woman truly is from a body, mind, and spiritual lens. So we'll be digging into scripture as well as things like yin yoga and yoga nidra, but also just opening the forum to talk and explore the components of womanhood and really what it means to be that alpha, as we hear so much about these days, woman. What does she look like? And more importantly, what did she look like in biblical times? So it'll be really interesting. So you can find
hmm
that on Instagram. Yeah.
Yeah. I find it interesting. It's like people always say, like, you have to know your history to know your future, where you're going. So you have to go way back, because there's a lot of talk about alpha women. But okay, but what does that mean? Is it your definition now? Or are you going back to what it meant, way back when? Like, always look behind just for a little bit. Don't stay there too long, but look behind so you can look forward clearly. So these are going to be fun. Hopefully, everyone, like, we Thank you so much for listening to True Health Live. We'll have way more coming for the rest of the year before we go on break again. But also make sure you tune into Alpha Woman Now, tune into the Womb Room on our New Life Global Ministries, and we'll have way more gems and things for you in all these spaces. As always, if you have anything you would like to share, something you would like us to talk about, you want to be interviewed, definitely hit us up at truehealthlive@gmail.com, or you can even drop a message or comment in the chat, and we will see you in the forward. Peace, everyone.
Peace.